Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Music Den. I'm your host, Armando Venditti. Hoping you guys are having a good day. Today, ladies and gentlemen, we have a special live album spotlight triple play for you. But before I get into the albums that we're going to be talking about today, first of all, ladies and gentlemen, I'm hosting this episode. I was not able to prepare with these albums to familiarize myself with these albums. So the crew here, we have Jim Ken and Sagosh, who's joining us for his second, uh, uh, how would you put this? Not your premiere, but your second go around on the Music Den. We have three live albums to talk to you about. And in terms of running the gamut, this list pretty much runs the gamut.
Yeah.
We have Shakti with John McLaughlin, Cowboy Junkies, and Michael Hedges. Uh, the name of the album of Michael Hedges is, as I look at my notes, uh, Live on the Double Planet. So we're going to split this up, okay, in terms of styles of music, okay? And the first album we're going to be discussing today, or the genre we're going to be discussing today, is Shakti with John McLaughlin, released in 1976 on Columbia Records. Uh, Single LP, three tracks in total. And who shall I pick on first? Jim,
Me?
of
Well,
course.
it was Sagosh's
You.
selection. I think we should select Sagosh to talk about it
Well,
first.
he is the quiet, shy one. So I'm gonna leave him for last. Okay. We're gonna go Jim Kensigosh. How's that?
Save the best for last. Yeah.
Yeah, save
Okay,
the best
fair,
for
fair
last.
enough. And Sagosh can tell us everything that we got wrong. Um,
There you go. There you go.
there we are. The other thing to note about all these three albums is that it's very guitar centric. So this is a very, this is an episode for the guitar freaks out there. And I don't think it gets much more freaky than McLaughlin. Of course, having said that, I'm thinking about Michael Hedges, so maybe I'll, erase that statement. Um, yeah, as Armando said, this is three tracks, one of which is 29 minutes and 4 seconds. How they managed to squeeze all that on one side of vinyl, I'll never know. But yeah, guitar, violin, tabla. Um, You're going to have to help me with the names of these percussion instruments here, Sagosh. Is it?
Yeah, I didn't
Yeah.
even bother to try. I'm sorry. In terms of the names,
It's
it's pretty
hard to pronounce it. Atam should be all right. It's the mridangam that generally gets most people.
Okay. It's
okay.
this album. This was the first time I've heard it. I've been aware of John McLaughlin, of course, through Friday Night in San Francisco and Mahavishnu Orchestra. Um, Even saw him play with Demiola and De Lucia and also Steve Morse. So I kind of knew what I was getting into with McLaughlin, but I was not prepared for this. This album is just ridiculously awesome. It's almost overwhelming, especially on side one. The combination. I mean, between McLaughlin's rock and jazz chops, between the just the deep Indian music that the rest of the band is bringing, Shankar on violin, Zakir Hussain, rest in peace, on tabla, and then Ramnad and TH, we'll leave it at that. Um, with the percussion, this is just like a, I don't know, speed metal Indian jam. I mean, it's just amazing how deft they all are and quick in the calls and responses on things. This is I've joked before that Laurie Anderson has this bit that she calls difficult listening hour, and this could fit in there if for the uninitiated. I mean, I've had my exposure to Indian music even directly, thank you to Sagosh. And and just little hybrids of Indian music, especially, um, not only do you have, of course, Within You and Without You by the Beatles, but I've listened to a lot of Bela Fleck and his combinations with Indian musicians, um,
Hmm.
including Zakir. And wow, this is a really, really great album. Um, Joy is just like it goes to 11. Lotus Feet, the second track, is nowhere near as intense, but it still has this, really unique vibe to it. And I just wish it didn't fade out early. And side two with the 29-minute track is slightly less intense than Joy, but it's still absolutely slamming once McLaughlin gets past his introductory blues runs, with Shankar doing the same.
I just
Um,
have one quick question, if I may. Um, Given the fact that maximum playing time on a side of vinyl is between 19 to 20 minutes maximum, and this is 29 minutes and 4 seconds or 3 seconds, is there a loss of sound quality on that side, on that
not on
track?
that, not that I could discern.
Sagosh, what do you?
Yeah, I mean, I am honestly, my ears are not that tuned to all these things. I couldn't tell you the difference between an MP3 and a CD. So I'm like really the wrong person to ask.
Oh, okay, okay, okay. No, no, no. I just wondering because they say that,
But yeah,
and then I'll
it
shut
does
up. Go
it
ahead.
does make you wonder what they were thinking because it's pretty much unprecedented at the peak of the vinyl era to come up with another album that has 29 minutes on one side. I mean, there are albums which are 29 minutes both sides. So
Sure.
this is
Well,
uh, quite a stretch, really. And
yeah.
general
Well,
feeling I get from the way this album seems to be approached is like they weren't keen to do too much with it because it was very, very fresh, very new, very, unprecedented in terms of what the music was, and nobody was sure probably what kind of market there would be for this kind of thing,
Hmm.
which also
okay.
lends to explain the, very unnecessary and unfortunate fade out of Lotus Feet. And given the length of the other two pieces, we really have no idea how long that would actually have gone on. And,
Okay.
Sure.
Okay.
minutes of that is very, very sad because it just about covers the introductory improvisation. And in fact, when the actual piece starts is when it fades out. So my sense is that the ideal thing would have been to make this a double,
Yeah.
but it looks like budget constraints, or they just were not sure whether it made sense to invest that much into this. That's my feeling, really.
Okay. Okay. No, I was just good points. I just wondered because again, they say that the longer a side is in terms of type length of music, the quality diminishes in terms of sound.
Yeah.
So,
It
like
might have to do with the sonics as far as um the spread of um highs and lows.
Mm.
Like something like a symphony might be more difficult than, something a smaller ensemble like this with,
So,
a narrower sonic range. I
true
don't know.
enough. True enough.
It's
Okay.
a
Okay.
guess. It's not a knowledgeable opinion.
Okay. Okay. My apologies for interrupting.
Yeah,
Please continue, Jim. Go ahead.
that's what we do.
Uh, yeah,
That's
no
what we
worries.
do.
Yes,
That's
this
what we
is
do.
this is what we do. I mean, the last thing I was going to say is that it might be, for the uninitiated, this might be a good album to tiptoe your way into through, listening to other um, things that have hybrids of Indian music in there. I mentioned the Beatles, of course.
Yeah.
Bela Fleck's another great resource for that. I mean, it's, to me, and Sagosh, you can correct me. This sounds like kind of Indian music with John McLaughlin as a guest.
absolutely.
Okay.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, highly recommend. This is a fantastic record to me.
All right. Ken? your
Sure.
viewpoint?
Yeah, if for our listeners whose extent of Indian music, um, is maxed out at the Rolling Stones, Paint It Black, this isn't that. Yeah. This
Okay.
is, yeah, my introduction to McLaughlin was also through the Friday Night in San Francisco album. And I have all the trio albums and other stuff too in my collection. So his musicianship was no surprise here. Um, um, it's incredible how he retains his personal style and molds it into the music and the genre, of this album of the Indian music. All of the musicianship is absolutely masterful here. It is just spot on. Um, I saw that McLaughlin used a custom guitar, and he used a different type of strings, sympathetic strings, that created more of a sitar sound or sitar-like sound. I can pick up on that. It's not extreme, but I think it fits what they're doing very, very well. A lot of my take from this album is a little more, say, academic, because that's where a lot of my music experience is from. Um, I love the this Indian classical mode. Um, I believe it's called raga, if that's right,
Perfect.
Kadosh.
Yeah.
And it's what's using that classical raga mode rather than Western scales and modes. The closest it gets is either the Phrygian or Lydian modes in its phrasing. Also, the Tala rhythmic mode, which usually alternates and is either eighths or sevenths, and the sevenths are particularly interesting rhythmically. Um, I especially picked up on. I believe all three of these pieces are based in the key of D, or at the root of D, the note D. I'm not going to call it D major since it's in these other modes. But yeah, it is mind-boggling. Jim, would you say mind-blowing or mind-melting? I don't remember what you
I think you
said.
said mind
Either
blowing.
is appropriate.
Either is appropriate, yeah. And so, like I said, McLaughlin's playing did not surprise me, but I was just very impressed on um, how he fits in so well with the Indian classical style. Just wonderful. And this album I read was very influential with many artists, specifically Carlos Santana, of course, Dee Miola, but also Pat Metheny has
Oh, no fun.
is quoted as really, loving this album. So, yeah, this is just really cool. It really is. It's I was trying to think about uh we talk about on this channel, you listen to this album, it's, you sit back in a hammock and relax, or you get up and you do stuff. What's the best setting for listening to this? And I really don't know. I just think it's just kind of, maybe sit back a little bit, and I don't know. I would just wanted to close my eyes and listen to it with my eyes closed. But uh, being a guitar player, I'm always fascinated with the visuals, and we'll talk about that a little bit more when we talk about Michael Hedges. Um, watching, these guitarists and what they do, it's just really crazy. That's why I like watching the Guitar Trio's, videos and seeing what it looks like, because it's just, when the hand is literally a blur. And but it's not just McLaughlin on this album. It's everything. It's all the other musicians too. It's very evenly matched. And
It's a
so
fair fight.
it's a fair fight, and it's a fantastic team effort at the same time. Yeah. So like Jim says, it takes maybe a little bit of dipping a toe in at a time, but it's definitely something to keep in mind when you really want to get a good flavor for this. Great album.
So, Ghosh, what is your history with this album and your viewpoint?
Oh, I have a long, long history with this one. This goes
Well, I
back
have a
about 40.
large coffee, so we can talk. Go ahead. Go ahead.
I think I listened to this around 1985, and I was about 8 years old at the time. I got into this music really from my dad. He was, of course, big time into Indian classical music, and through him, I was already introduced to L. Shankar as a classical violinist,
Mhm.
and familiar with his slightly unorthodox style of even playing pure classical music. At that time, like I was exposed to a lot of very traditionalist Indian violinists, and even there, when I heard Shankar playing, what would pass for regular Indian music, there was definitely a spark. There was something even at that age I could recognize that there was something different he was doing. He was not like the other
Right.
traditional. So when I came upon this tape in my dad's collection, which had the first two Shakti albums, and he informed me that this was basically music that attempted to fuse Indian with Western music, and at that time I had just about started dipping my toes into Western pop. And so this was an interesting point for me to get in, although I had absolutely no idea about jazz or about who John McLaughlin was or anything. But just the idea at that time seemed very fresh and new, the idea of Indian and West. I hadn't even heard the Beatles at this point. So
Mm.
I came in with the idea that this had never been done. So it was something very exciting for me to check out. And the first time I remember playing it, it's just, and I have to say, I tried looking it up, but I could not find too much information about the concert itself and about how it was arranged, or what was the preparation, whether they had played any other concerts before. I don't have any information about that. So given that, given the limited information that I have, it seems like all the more mind-blowing to me that you think of an audience somewhere in 1970s America, university, and 99% of the audience are there for John McLaughlin. They have obviously never heard of any of the other instruments any of the other players on stage. They have no idea of what kind of music this is. They're coming in probably from McLaughlin's jazz background, expecting maybe more of the same with a little bit of embellishment. And they just come in and they sit down. And frankly, I don't even know whether how much of, like I said, performance these musicians have done together before. So, or I don't know, it may be just rehearsals. It may even be their first, public performance. And they walk in, they sit down, and the way the album opens is a little bit of applause. There's some, minor tune-ups happening. A quick "good evening, friends. Thank you for that warm welcome," and then it just explodes into joy. That first moment when everything just comes together. It is insane. And at 8 years old, I don't need to tell you what my reaction would have been for it.
Yeah.
It was
I can imagine. Yeah, I can imagine.
never heard anything played at that speed. Even with all my years of listening, I still have heard very little that's played at that speed, at that intensity for that long. I mean, of course, you have a lot of virtuoso musicians doing, very high speed workouts, but the whole incessant, pulsing of joy for 18 minutes at a stretch with no breaks, no sort of let up, that is insane. I mean, I think it's still unmatched for my money.
Mhm.
Yeah.
There's just nothing that comes close to it. And
Okay.
it's been mentioned on the liner notes as well. And I totally agree that it is the understatement of maybe all of mankind's history to call this song just joy. I mean, joy is far, far too weak a word to describe the kind of emotion and the kind of intensity that it has. I mean, the liner notes suggest intense joy, but even that's too little. I don't know. Probably it's beyond the capabilities of language to even express what it might signify.
Sure.
Okay.
One of the things that kind of stood out to me, Sagosh, is that, the track that takes up all of side two, the introduction is that this is simply called, and then the title is, "What need have I for this? What need have I for that? I am dancing at the feet of my Lord. All is bliss, all is bliss." That's the whole title of the song. And, I just love the fact that he says, "This is simply called," and then there's this, 30-word title that kind of spools out.
Yeah.
I mean, i- is that kind of understatement typical of Indian culture?
I don't know. I mean, yeah, it is probably something that we do a lot. I mean, sort of there's sort of contradictory humor kind of thing. But I mean, beyond that, one thing I would say that also indicates the amount of there's a lot of intensity. There's clearly a very clear path to some kind of spiritual awakening through this music. It is not very mundane level at all. But at the same time, you can see that the musicians, they're young, they're enthusiastic, they're just trying to find their way around something which is new to them, new to everybody else. And there's this, you can sense the excitement, the humor, the sort of childish joy that they get out of playing together. There's a lot of points, especially on the side B piece, where in the interludes where they're just changing over instruments, or there's just a pause for applause, or just quieter parts. You'll hear a little bit of a snigger here and there, a little encouragement, and at the end of it, when there's just this minute or so of applause, even there you get the sense that you can just picture these guys sort of sniggering at each other and saying, "Wow, we actually did this." There's that. Uh, there's a very humorous aspect to it, but at the same time, if you look at it, simply might have another meaning here, because I mean, obviously, the title itself being so many words long is not simple by the definition of language. But if you look at it, simply here might just mean that this is actually the simple essence of spiritual quest.
Mhm.
It all just boils down to this: I am dancing at the feet of my Lord. All is bliss. That's the essence of purpose in life. And
Yeah,
you
I
can't
don't
get more.
need this. I don't need that. Simply this.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's a long title, but wraps up a very simple philosophy.
Yeah. I hope someday they recover the master tapes and like do the full performance, because wow,
Absolutely.
that would be
Sad that I imagine
fantastic.
if this is
Discogs.
what's on this release, can you imagine what the full performance would be like?
Yeah.
I mean, all due respect, I mean, sounds to me it sounds like with this album, the rule was there were no rules in terms of the
Absolutely.
performance, right? They didn't follow any guidelines. They just did what they wanted to do with the performance, and they would work the rest out later in terms of how to release this.
Yeah. I'm not sure if they'd even walked in with the idea of releasing it as a record or whatever, because it's hard to imagine going in with that purpose, because as musicians looking to, and let's not forget here that it's not even about not following the rules. Is that even if you walk in with the entire intense desire of following the rules, you can't, because there are no rules there. You are creating something that doesn't fit into any of the existing
Yeah,
models. So
yeah.
there's no point of even thinking about rules. You have to make it up as you go along and hope that it becomes a new standard, which in some ways it kind of did. But yeah, I was very disappointed with the fact that despite we being in the golden age of super deluxe editions, there is no attempt at even a sort of double disc bonus track issue or anything. There was, I think, one remaster sometime in 99 or 2000. That's the disc I have, because I have penciled in the date of my purchase. It's 2001. So it was released as part of the Columbia Jazz Masters series with a little bit of extra liner notes and stuff. And that's, as far as I know, that's the latest sort of update that we have on this album, which is very, very sad. And considering that Shakti have not only endured over the years, they have gone on tour multiple times, they are in the news, they've got multiple Grammys since that time. And John McLaughlin, just his reputation just continues to grow and
evolve. Yeah.
absolutely undiminished. So I'm very surprised that nobody's even thought of it, because it is no more an excuse that there is no market, or you can't justify the sales. I think today we are justifying sales of all kinds of things. I can't think of a market for at least 80% of the super deluxe editions out there, quite frankly.
Yeah.
I mean, some of it is just insane.
Yeah.
8 CD box sets and 10 CD box sets and what have you. So it's more than a little surprising that they haven't chosen to expand this. But the fact that they haven't suggests to me rather sadly that probably there isn't anything that they can expand on. Probably maybe the tape really just faded out at the end of Lotus Field. I don't know. We'll never really know, I suppose.
Would you recommend, you said you purchased your copy in 2001. Would you recommend the copy you purchased as the one, I guess, definitive version for someone to get an up-to-date version of this album, to get the copy you have to purchase?
There isn't much of an update, really. I mean, it has probably been remastered. That's a word that honestly means nothing to me, because my ears really can't detect much. But yeah, probably the latest that you have. And yeah, like I said, there is a little bit of an attempt at liner notes done by somebody from Downbeat magazine, which is, I suppose it's all right for somebody who comes in from the jazz perspective. As somebody who came in from the Indian perspective, I was very disappointed with it, because there were like maybe 2 mentions of El Shankar all across it. And it was all about McLaughlin and his career and how he got into this and at what point he was in his career when he started Shakti and all, which is all very well for the Western fan, I suppose. But doesn't say much about the music on this record. It says a lot about where McLaughlin came from and how he got here, but it doesn't say anything about what's inside. And in some ways, I suppose that's about all you can do for this album. It's very difficult to put words to the experience. So in some ways, I suppose I can understand that. But yeah, I mean, having bought the disc and seen extensive liner notes and found it, there wasn't much to really expand on. Maybe they could have got somebody with more of an Indian classical perspective to expand on those parts of the music that were obviously a little obscure to the jazz fan. I feel that Columbia missed a trick there.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's why we need the super deluxe for the Indian perspective.
Okay.
Like Jim pointed out, and I have always found this a completely Indian classical album with a little bit of guitar thrown in. I mean, the themes, the central compositions are very, very rooted in Indian music. There is a little bit of embellishment, a little bit of added improvisation in the jazz style, but the core of it is absolutely, totally Indian in its musical content, sort of spiritual goals. It's very, very, I would put it alongside the Indian classical canon completely.
Yeah,
it's just
that's what struck me too. Yeah,
person who's interested in Indian music to get into this would be nothing at all, because I mean it wouldn't feel very incongruous to me. Interesting fact, which would probably not be very familiar to Western audiences, is the way the pieces are arranged. So Joy, I suppose the way Joy works is kind of very similar to how a jazz band might work, because you just thrust straight away into the main theme or composed part of it. And then, after that's done, you launch into your solos and your interplay, give each person a little bit of time, come together, go apart again, do your stuff, and then come back to the main theme, close it. That's, with my limited understanding of jazz, I believe that's how jazz works. Correct me if I'm wrong.
You're on the right track.
Yeah.
On the flip side, you see what need have I for this? At its core, its arrangement, the various sort of movements it goes into are very much part of the Indian tradition. In fact, I can trace it directly to sort of extended concert piece tradition known as Ragam Tanam Pallavi.
Mm-hmm.
This is where the composition is, the main composition itself is only about, maybe a couple of lines, not very extensive, but there's a very long prelude and sort of, outro, so to speak. So it starts with the ragam section, which is essentially, you pick a rag and, a scale, and you indulge in a lot of free-form improvisation.
Mm-hmm.
That is essentially what happens at the start of what we Nearby for this. Where both John and Shankar indulge in a few minutes of just free form going up and down the scale in whatever way they, fancy at that particular time. This then moves into the tanam, which is again improvisation, but there's a rhythmic element to it. So it's no longer completely free form. And you will notice this at some point during the composition. It starts getting a little bit more rhythmic. There is a pattern to it.
Okay.
And then once the tanam is complete, we come to the pallavi, which is where the actual composed piece is introduced. And once we get into the pallavi, that's repeated a few times, sometimes in different speeds and, different variations. And eventually, once that is done, once the pallavi is concluded, we move into what is known as the taniya avartanam, which is the percussion section. This is where usually in most concerts we would have a bare minimum of 2 kind of percussion instruments. This is a standard. Sometimes you have 3 or 4, but 2 is like the minimum. And in the percussion section, that's where they have their opportunities to solo, as well as to indulge in a bit of interplay, where there's a kind of call and response where one person plays a pattern on his instrument and it's kind of followed by the other one. And it's a kind of an impression of a mock duel, so to speak.
Okay.
And then once the percussion section is complete, they all come together again, repeat the theme, and close the piece. So that, in a sense, if you view what need have I for this with this lens, it is very much conforming to that pattern. So in that sense, if you look at it, not only are they trying to fuse, 2 different styles of music, with one side being arranged more in the traditional jazz style and the other side being arranged more in the traditional Indian classical style, there's again a sort of balance created over there.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly sounds like, obviously the Indian scales and the modes are different than, traditional Western, but from the standpoint of form, there is a great similarity between, jazz and, what's happening here, with this form of music. That they're not too dissimilar there.
Yeah, in fact, I would say the only real difference, apart from the obvious one where jazz has a lot of, harmonic component, which simply doesn't exist in Indian music. Otherwise, the only real difference between jazz and Indian classical music is that jazz doesn't impose any sort of melodic restrictions. You're free to, traverse the entire gamut of notes available to you. Whereas Indian classical music does have very specific restrictions on what notes are permissible and not permissible in any raga. Some ragas are very, very sort of rigid. You have only these notes and there's only this much you can do. Some ragas allow the inclusion of a couple of notes here and there that don't traditionally belong but can be sort of introduced in creative ways. But fundamentally, there is a fairly limited set of notes that you can play with for any specific piece in Indian classical music. So that's the only real difference. And my sense is that because Indian classical musicians have to familiarize themselves with all of these various combinations and scales. So the melodic sense is so well developed that it becomes very easy for them to blend in with jazz musicians and catch the essence of what they're doing when they're making a melodic shift.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
That's why classical and jazz work very well together.
I need to check this album
Absolutely.
out.
Yeah, you do.
I really need to sit and listen to this album and just soak it in. Because, like I said, I've seen it before. The cover was familiar to me when I saw it, when I was getting the graphics ready for this. So, yeah, I really do need to sit and listen to this.
I'd like to add that.
Sorry, go ahead.
We're talking about this specific album right now, but just as a sort of general guideline for people trying to get into this music, I would say that when you're coming in from the Western perspective, it is probably better to go into Shakti sort of in reverse. They had three albums with the main lineup, that is John McLaughlin, L. Shankar, Zakir Hussain, and Vikku Vinayakam. These were all released between 76 and 77. They had a few later incarnations with other musicians, but these three are what I would call the core canon. And I think as a mark of how their music progressed in sense of where they started with, and once they got an idea of what they were trying to do, they were able to streamline it better. So in that sense, Shakti is sort of well in reverse for the jazz fan, because their last album from the 70s, Natural Elements, is one that would have a lot more instantaneous appeal to a person who was not coming from an Indian classical background, and it would be a lot easier for them to grasp, because the live is really throwing them in at the deep end. I mean, it's fantastic, it's an experience, but I absolutely acknowledge that it's throwing them in at the deep end. Sure. And the fact that there is comparatively less of the jazz element in that.
Yeah.
But the other two albums are much more composed pieces. There's a lot less of the extended 29-minute kind of stuff. They feel more like well arranged, well produced studio albums, which they are. So I would recommend going in with Natural Elements first, and then the second album, A Handful of Beauty. And then once you're sort of truly immersed in what Shakti can do as a band, then you come to the live and you realize what their full potential is.
Okay. Good to know. Good to know. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we must continue from one end of the spectrum to the other. We have next up on the list, Cowboy Junkies, quartet from Toronto, Ontario, featuring the Timmins siblings, Margot, Michael, and Peter. Margot on lead vocals, along with Alan Anton. And their 1995 live release, 200 More Miles live performances from 1985 to 1994, released on October 10th, 1995 through RCA, a double disc. Now, I know of Cowboy Junkies. I think that Margot Timmins has a fantastic, some would say cerebral tone in her voice in terms of the type of music that Cowboy Junkies is mostly known for, with songs like Misguided Angel. But again, superb nonetheless. But before I, continue on, I'll stop myself there and I'll pass the virtual mic over to Jim and for his take on this album. Again, it's a double live album. So, uh,
It is, it is.
Jim.
Sure. I first became familiar with Cowboy Junkies, as probably most of the world, through the Trinity Session album that was released in 1988,
Yeah.
which was, basically the band um, recording in front of a single ambisonic microphone in an old church in Toronto, and just a mix of blues, country, folk, rock, and jazz. Just within this incredibly intimate setting, made for this recording that I don't know. I guess in retrospect, I kind of see this as maybe a beginning of shoegaze, just because it's so down tempo. The everything is at such a low clip that maybe you can detect a heartbeat in there. Maybe there's a pulse. But I mean, that's to me, that's part of the absolute joy of this album is that if you want to get into that vibe, you are completely sucked into it. And live, as this live album demonstrates, it's they can capture that lightning in a bottle and bring it to the stage. Trinity Session is not a fluke. Um,
If I
they
can
have
just,
seven.
sorry,
Please.
if I can just interject. Um, the album has, as well as original compositions, there are covers from Robert Johnson, Bruce Springsteen, um, Lou Reed. So it's quite the list here in terms of also John Lee Hooker as I'm looking to the list here. But yeah, please continue. I mean, this is quite the album overall.
Yeah, it is.
Yes.
And just to finish off with the covers, I mean, they've got two drop dead classics in the old country canon. I'm So Lonesome I Could Cry, which was a Hank Williams tune, and then
Mhm.
Walking After Midnight, which was made famous by Patsy Cline. So their cred is deep and strong. Um, Margot, as you pointed out, is an amazing vocalist. She's got a very moody and gentle alto most of the time. She can break free from it if she needs to, but I
Mhm.
just love that her voice is just filled with longing and intimacy, and I
Mhm.
think it just really is captured well on this album. Whether it's like murderous blues, um little small moments and vignettes of life, or just some lonesome longing here. I mean, this album has pretty much got it all, and they really connect with an audience. You could tell that they are just kind of really listening. I think some of these tracks were recorded in really small clubs, and some were in like some good sized halls, especially in Toronto. Um,
Probably
and
Massey
it's
Hall. Probably Massey
Massey. Okay,
Hall. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, they just really connect on here. Um, 21 tracks in all. And you know in contrast to Shakti and Michael Hedges, which we'll talk about, this is not like a guitar shred freak out album.
Not at
Um,
all.
it's very slow and low, just like you're smoking some ribs on a barbecue. I mean, they're plugged in between the electric and then the pedal steel or the slide that's there. They're just really evoking a mood, and there are times when it's like I've said, you can barely get a pulse. Um, like Where Are You Tonight is like it barely registers, but then that disc ends with Murder Tonight in the Trailer Park, and they're plugged in and they're just revving up. They're going for it, so they can run the gamut. Their wheel bag is not exclusively with opium den type country. Um, um, I'll call out. just a couple of my favorite tunes here. There's a song on here that's entitled "'Cause Cheap Is How I Feel," but it has a wonderful spoken intro by Margot about her travails with getting ready for a concert and
Yeah.
dealing with pigeons. Um, and then there's a duet with John Prine on here called "If You Were the Woman and I Was the Man," which is just a gorgeous, gorgeous tune. The harmony and melodic line on this song is just absolutely fantastic. The John Lee Hooker cover called "Forgive Me" is great. Their version of "State Trooper" by Springsteen is great. And the songs that they're bringing forth from the Trinity Sessions album is just done masterfully. This is a great intro to for Cowboy Junkies because I think it kind of paints a broader picture than Trinity Session, which is, kind of it's a one trick pony, but it's a hell of a trick. So I don't mean to sort of tamp down the impact and beauty of Trinity Session, but this I think gives a fuller picture of what the band is capable of doing.
I've always
Not
said
only does it
never,
have
sorry, I've always said never underestimate the power of a good trick when need, when
Ba-dum-bum.
needed. There you go.
Okay.
So,
All right. My one last comment
but
is that it does have the four core members that Armando mentioned earlier, but they're also augmented by a couple of other guys on like a second guitar, accordion, piano, um, violin. I think I've heard on one track. And again, these were recorded across several years, and so you get a little bit of stylistic difference, but not much. The core and the beauty of Cowboy Junkies kind of sings through all of these tracks. This is one of my favorite live albums of all time, even though it's unlike most of the live albums that I listen to. I think it's just because it's executed so perfectly. Um, so there we go, 200 more miles. That's my spiel on that.
okay, aside from me noticing that Ken Lecter ribs on the barbecue motif or comparison there, um, I
Low and low,
just
brother.
I just wanted to say one thing. A good live album doesn't always have to be pyrotechnics and screeching guitar solos, and it doesn't have to be that. It can be 200 more miles. It can, do you know what I mean? Like you can have
Oh yeah.
both. You know what I mean? So to represent a good live recording. So, and as someone who I will admit who has not heard this album, I am going to purchase this album along with Shakti after the big surprise, Ken, after the
Really?
descriptions I've
It's my
heard
shocked face.
of these two albums. you know, but I get what you're saying.
Well,
I've
well, I
always loved
figured as a
Margot's voice.
card-carrying Canadian that you would have to have this album.
Well, I don't think you have to have it, but I've always loved Margot's voice. Um, I think she has a very powerful, emotional, and emotive voice. I'm gaining a new respect just from listening about it. So, but I will curtail my opinion until later. Ken, your view on this album?
Yeah, I like Jim's you know, smoking ribs on the barbecue, but I think they were smoking something else. Um,
Oh, shots
oh yeah.
fired.
Would you say pot? Is that what you're talking about? Marijuana?
Well,
Marijuana?
Jim's the one that mentioned the opium den.
Well, it's legal in
I don't
Canada,
know
so
where
it's
he got
okay.
that idea from, but
Yeah,
It's legal in
I know
Canada, so
exactly
there you
where it
go.
came from.
okay.
Never
Um,
underestimate that as well. A good power of a good joint. Okay, so I mean, it's
okay. Um, my introduction to Cowboy Junkies was their cover of Sweet Jane.
yeah,
Um,
that was a
I'm
hit.
not, yeah, I'm not a big Velvet Underground fan. Um, so, and actually, Junkies version of Sweet Jane, I heard before I heard the original. So go figure.
Yeah, so
But
did I.
they do have a very distinctive sound and style. Um, uh, like the fact that this album covers um, a longer period of time in their career. In other words, this is not just taken from one tour or
Yeah.
one specific concert. It shows I appreciate the consistency in their playing and in the emoting for these songs. In other words, over time they didn't just start phoning it in,
Yeah.
and I really do appreciate that. Um, for me, this album would have been okay as a single disc. Um, as a musician, I really like playing this style of music, kind of laid back and just really, get into it. But both as a musician and a listener, um, it's just a little bit too much of the low key stuff in one sitting for me. I would have liked a little bit more variety, you know. Um, but
Okay.
that's just who they are. So so for me, this was just a little bit, you know, maybe too much of a good thing. We've talked about that and other things in other videos before.
Is
Um,
that possible?
it's
I don't
possible,
know.
Do we want to
but
argue about that again, gentlemen?
yeah, really.
I got my
Um,
coffee.
yeah, part two. The
Mhm.
but like I said, this is like Jim says, this is very specific. It's well done. It is a particular genre, within music, and you specifically mentioned shoegaze. So for what it is, I think it's fantastic, but I would have to be in a very specific mood for it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Most of the bands that I listen to a lot of, there is just a little bit more of a variety in styles and tempos and da 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 and all that stuff. Um, but yeah, but it's 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 very good. It's you know, if you like Cowboy Junkies or this flavor of music, this is definitely a go-to. And it sounds so good, it doesn't even sound like a live album, if you know what I'm saying.
Oh, I
Oh
know
yeah.
exactly what you're saying. Okay. Okay. Kiss Alive. Moving on. Um, won't even go there. Okay. All right. Sagosh, what is your opinion of this album?
Yes, I have not heard too much of Cowboy Junkies. I first came across them sometime in the early 2000s, I think, when music store here was having a sale and they had like a markdown copy of Pale Sun Crescent Moon, and that was the first album I heard. I later managed to get Trinity Sessions, but I never really, you know, bothered to get deeper into their music. So a lot of the songs on this one were not familiar to me already.
Okay.
But yeah, what he said, the overall vibe is very, very pleasant, very enjoyable. The one thing I would say, and I think something that Jim touched on as well, is that they've kept the way they sound is just so consistent that on a blind test you wouldn't really be able to tell that this is an album of recordings in different venues at different times across 10
Okay.
years.
I got you.
You really don't get that vibe at all. If I just listened to it without knowing, the title 1984 to 1994, I would quite easily assume that it's a single concert. And there's a little bit of sort of nudging in that direction as well. Whereas on the last song, I think it's Walking After Midnight, at the end of the applause, she says, "Thank you, we'll see you again." And there's a feel that, okay, it's the end of the concert. And then after that, I think they've tacked on the cover of Bad Boy. And if I'm not mistaken, it comes up after a bit of applause. So it sounds like they're coming back for an encore. So there is this sort of pseudo single concert vibe created.
Yeah, Bad Boy is a hidden track on the album from Larry Williams. So yeah, yeah.
Admittedly, that's not one I enjoyed too much because it is just a bit too dramatically removed from what the rest of the album
Right.
sounds. It doesn't even sound like Margot singing, honestly.
Yeah.
It's just way out there.
Yeah.
I mean, you wouldn't expect any band to actually, like, if the intention was to show it as an encore, it would be a very unexpected encore where somebody comes on and does something nobody expects them to do and just, has a total bash at it.
Sure.
But yeah, I mean, if that was intentional, it was kind of cute. I liked it. The other thing I would say is that although I have admitted before that I don't really have the ears for this kind of thing, but to me, this was an album that has an excellent sound, and I think it would really do well as a sort of testing demonstration kind of disc. I mean,
Oh, so not only
subtle,
Asia. Okay. Sorry.
there's a
Yes,
lot of
there are other audiophile tests besides Steely Dan.
Yes, yes. No, it's just a joke. Cause
my opinion. I know nothing of audio. I know nothing of recording quality or CD quality or anything. But it just gave me, that this is the sort of thing that I would like to hear on a supposedly fantastic system, because
Yeah.
the whole thing is so subtle. The playing
Yeah.
is very nuanced.
Yeah.
There's nothing overtly in your face, but at the same time, the recording is so beautiful that you can catch every little subtle detail that each instrument playing. The separation of instruments is fantastic. I mean, when I was listening in, I could really enjoy every tiny little flourish of guitar. Or there's this section on because that's how cheap I feel. What that song was.
yeah,
There's a section, of little trilling of the mandolin on the side, and that really comes through beautifully. Along with the other instruments, you can really focus on that. And, you can sort of pick your instrument and decide that I'm going to listen to only the guitars, and you have the ability to actually tune out everything else and listen to that. The separation is that good.
So there's good separation of instruments on this recording.
Again, very surprising for something that's recorded in multiple venues, multiple dates, across years, and most of the songs have this kind of consistency, which is very amazing. I mean, full marks to whoever did the production and all that stuff.
Okay. Okay. All right.
The other thing I want to highlight is upfront, maybe they just tacked two of them on too quickly, and that led to the feeling that the entire album is a little bit too laid back. Because I think it's like the third or fourth track. I don't know, Me and the Devil and State Trooper in quick succession. Because two are like the sort of hit you between the eyes kind of moment for this album, because even as somebody who's heard Cowboy Junkies before, I was not expecting those two. The way they were arranged, the way they were performed, there's a sort of intensity and power to it that is not there in most of the other songs. I mean, it's not part of their usual vibe at all. And I looked it up later and I found out that both these tracks are from, I think, their first album. I forget what.
But White's Off Earth.
That's right.
What their first album is called. Yeah.
So both these covers really strike me as very extraordinary, because they've done the whole atmosphere so perfectly. Like, I have not heard the original Robert Johnson version of Me and the Devil, but I feel like this is kind of definitive, because there is a real menace to it. You can feel that. You can feel the whole, the eeriness of the situation where you're actually trading your soul with the devil. It's the instrumentation is so perfect. There are moments where this violin goes absolutely batshit crazy, and there's this accordion doing a very crazy 8 miles high kind of psychedelic interpretation. And
he actually said batshit crazy. I like that. Okay,
it works.
Good. That's good.
It works for this song. Absolutely.
That's good.
Absolutely. And similarly for State Trooper, there's that underlying throbbing bass line, and it's like from the get-go you have this intensity, this eeriness, settling in. And I felt like they missed a trick putting both those songs together because it was like too much intensity at one go, and then the rest of the album is very sort of laid back vibe. Maybe if they had, sort of moved those around and given you a little bit of a jolt at various points rather than putting them both together, maybe it would have
Yeah,
worked.
it's fair.
But no complaints. I mean, the album is fantastic. Margot's voice is terrific. It is admittedly a mood, but if you're in that mood, it really keeps you going.
Nothing better, yeah. Yeah.
I would just
Yeah, they
be
have.
very. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Ken.
Go ahead, Ken.
No.
I would just be very curious about their concerts, what the mosh pit would look like.
Probably smoked up potheads, just
It would look
calm,
like that image you sent me of the opium den, Ken.
too
You know
too
that.
calm,
Come on.
too calm to do
Do I
anything.
need to send that again?
My
No,
question,
you don't.
my one question before we move on to Jim and Ken, well, to all three of you, I guess, how well known are the Cowboy Junkies in America in terms of, because in Canada they're obviously well known, they're well respected, revered. How are they well known in your parts of, and to you as well as to Goshen, in your parts of the world?
Well, I was working in a music store when Trinity Session came out, and it was just the bomb. Everyone, you know, it had a lot of talk in the music industry. It had a lot of pickup in the record stores. I mean, you just had to listen to it, and you were instantly pulled in. I mean, the album they made a name for themselves with Trinity Session,
Yeah,
and they've maintained kind of a niche audience since then. They recently played a gig in Berkeley at this, like, I'm going to say, 600 seat theater called Freight and Salvage, which I think they sold it out in, like, the day it was announced. And it was I really wanted to go, but I was too late. It's a
okay,
40th anniversary tour, there. So I'm really curious about how it sounds or whatnot. But they're a name. Obviously not at the same peak as Trinity Session, but they're a name.
okay, okay. So Gosh, how well known are Cowboy Junkies? Not well known. Okay,
I mean, I took a complete chance on them. This was pre, smartphone era. So I
okay,
had those days. I used to just do this kind of thing. If something was available on the cheap, I would pick up anything random that looked interesting and then go home
okay,
and check it out.
Yeah.
okay.
Uh,
Oh,
it
okay.
happened to be there, and it was an import CD. I don't think, as such, very very few international artists are actually like manufactured locally in India. You get a handful of these import CDs coming in randomly based on what each music store feels their clientele would like. But
Exactly.
only the very very extreme mainstream artists that actually get produced in sizable quantities in India, and even those are very very few. Like to just give you an example, the first time any Jethro Tull album was released in India was, I think, 1992.
Really?
Okay.
Yeah. So
Okay. Okay. Interesting.
1992, anybody who had a Jethro Tull album was at some point in some degree of separation connected to somebody who had purchased vinyl from abroad. That was the only way you could get the music.
Okay. Interesting.
That's
Good to know.
okay there.
All right. No, good to know. Good to know. All right, ladies and gentlemen. Um, we must carry on. Our last album that we're going to be talking about on this live album Spotlight Triple Play is from Michael Hedges, Live on the Double Planet. Released in 1987, recorded from July of 86 to May of 1987, with a playing time of 43 minutes and 56 seconds. The album was produced by Michael Hedges, rest in peace. Now, in looking at the track listing, I was quite surprised to find out that he does covers from Bob Dylan, Lennon and McCartney, and Prince, which is I found quite
Yes.
surprising. He does a pared down version of A Love Bizarre, the original version from Prince and Sheila E. Sheila E. Let's say Prince, for God's sake, was 12 minutes and 18 seconds long. This version is pared down to a mere 40 minutes and 30 seconds. So I will stop talking and I will pass the original mic over to Jim. Your take on this album?
Yeah. Michael Hedges, first of all, um, Michael Hedges is one of those rare guitar players who has a very distinctive sound that is really all his own. I mean, there ain't nobody who sounded like Michael Hedges before he appeared, and since he's been gone, there still hasn't been anyone who can capture all the dynamics of a guitar that Hedges can, or could. Uh, I grabbed this from the interwebs this morning, a quote from Discogs, which says that during his lifetime, Hedges referred to his music with a variety of unlikely terms, including violent acoustic, heavy mental, acoustic thrash, new edge, and edgy pastoral. And I think that really applies. He, okay, one more general comment. Um,
One? Go ahead.
the
A
before I talk
lot.
about the album proper, young man, the his approach to the guitar is not just limited to um the stuff that you would do on the right hand, by the amplification hole. He is using the entire guitar as his instrument. So he is up and down that fretboard with blinding speed for these, little bits of pyrotechnics or harmonics or just, percussive runs that are just astounding. I So Live on the Double Planet is pieces, I believe, from one show. It might be from a couple. It's a mix of instrumentals and tunes that he sings, like "A Love Bizarre." Um, it's not entirely solo. Ken, correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think Michael Manring is guesting on bass with Ricky Shuffle.
Correct.
Um,
Mhm.
yeah,
Fretless bass.
Michael Manring. I'm sorry.
Yeah, fretless bass.
Fretless bass. Yeah, Michael Manring is, um, his sound can be reminiscent of Jocko, but Manring occupies his own
Mhm.
space in the bass pantheon. He's just absolutely astounding. Um, for the uninitiated, a lot of people will they see Windham Hill and they kind of go, "Ooh, George Winston," or just kind of this new agey kind of, I don't know, musical rot that doesn't really have a lot of substance. Frankly, I think that opinion is just, uninformed and just kind of ignorant to the breadth of what Windham Hill did put out, even though it did kind of focus on this. It's not jazz, it's not classical, it's not folk. It's kind of a hybrid mix of
It's
all.
a
And I
mesh.
think
Yeah, it's a
it's
mesh.
a mesh, and Hedges was one of the meshiest people on their label, and I think he was also one of the most virtuosic. He's just absolutely astounding on his on this record. Whether it's very subtle mood pieces or something that's really kind of upbeat and funky, like the funky avocado that's on here, which has a nice little Rolling Stones quote in there. Um, um, I I prefer Michael Hedges when his mouth is shut. Um, I can.
And we'll get to
He's
you in a minute.
he sings okay, but his playing is so far above his vocal ability to me that it almost kind of detracts. But
Yeah.
having said that, this is a super 43 minutes. I I think this album is great, and it's a good entry point for someone to sort of get their arms around kind of really the totality of what Windham Hill did when it was a vibrant record label.
Okay. And I get what you're saying. In terms of his vocal ability, Steve Howe, yes, is not known for his vocal ability. So would Michael Hedges' singing be the equivalent of, say, Steve Howe trying to tackle Tales of Topographic Oceans in its entirety and not able to do it? Do you know what I mean? Like it's
I'm going to take a hard pass on that one.
okay, okay. Because I've heard comments of Steve Howe's vocal ability, how it's not up to snuff compared to John Anderson or
Well, few people are up to stuff with John Anderson, so
okay,
That's
okay.
that's true.
Good to know.
Um,
Good to
wh-
know.
one other thing is, I kind of talked about this as a Guitar Freaks episode, and I think to me, Michael Hedges, putting him in the same sentence as John McLaughlin is not too far of a reach. Obviously, what Hedges is doing is very different than McLaughlin, and I think there are things that one can do that the other cannot. But I think Hedges, as a guitarist, deserves to be in that same conversation as people who just are stupefyingly great on their instrument.
Okay,
So for
okay,
people who don't know of Michael Hedges and they like really dig McLaughlin, I would recommend a little trip into Michael Hedges' world.
okay. What album would you recommend in 10 words or less?
Live on Double Planet is a good one to start with. I also recommend the compilation called Beyond Boundaries.
Okay,
That's my personal favorite.
okay. Good to know. Good to know. He's brand new to me, so this would be
Dude, we're gonna go 3 for 3 on this episode for what you're gonna end up buying through Amazon or other
well,
places.
the first two are a definite, but we will don't give me that look. This is my show. Give me don't give me that look. Uh,
It is your show.
okay. 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 Um, okay, comedy over. All right. Ken, your review on this album?
okay. I saw Michael Hedges right about this time
Okay.
in a um, it wasn't a large venue, mid-sized venue. Um, and just him on stage with a guitar. Absolutely amazing. I discovered Michael Hedges with his first album, Breakfast in the Field. Um, his first two albums are strictly just instrumental. It was the third album, Watching My Life Go By, in which um, is his vocal album, in him and guitar, just vocal, but not a full band. Just a few extra instruments, maybe a bass and a flute or something like that.
Mhm.
Michael Hedges credits part of his inspiration um, from Stephen Stills. If you've ever heard Stephen Stills play Black Queen, which is one of his solo tracks, that's just him and acoustic guitar, you can hear the guitar slapping, the on and off of the strings, the harmonics and all of that.
Okay.
That is what Michael Hedges took and multiplied in his style. And it's interesting, there's a lot of his technique that um, a lot of current guitarists are implementing on a very small scale that are getting recognition for. And I want to say, hey, wait a minute, take a look back and listen to my
Yeah,
edges
yeah,
and
yeah.
hear
Give
where
credit
that came
where
from.
credit is due, kind of thing. Yeah.
Also, um, is incredible sounding for his guitar playing is to really be able to enjoy and appreciate it. I think you need to be able to see what he's doing with the guitar.
Yeah.
There's quite a few videos on YouTube, but unfortunately, not very many of them are of good quality. But you can still see what he's doing. Um, uh, and Jim, you were talking about people's impression of Windham Hill. Well, yeah, he does fit in with the Windham Hill at the time. Um, you can see the video of him and his long dreadlocks, and he's got an incense stick, on his guitar, so he's very, very hippie-ish. Um, uh, I'm sure he imbibed in more than just funky avocados, but there we go. His songwriting is just amazing. The first two albums that are strictly instrumental, the soundscapes that he is able to create with just an acoustic guitar is amazing. He is, like I said, he's an incredible live performer. Now, his third album, Watching My Life Go By, I think his voice is very powerful. He has a very strong and a very powerful voice. He's got an impressive vocal range. His lyrics are wonderful. There's so I think, and obviously, most of his stuff is his original compositions. So what he's doing vocally fits in actually really quite well with what he's doing on guitar. And also just with his, I think it's amazing he can do both at the same time, considering, his acrobatics on the guitar, what he's doing. But there it is, it just, I avoided the vocal album for a long time because I thought singing, but eventually I broke down because I'm a completist, and I was really amazed how much I love his vocal work on that third album. Some of the best love songs and introspective songs, these are on this album. So yeah, let me get back to what album we're talking about. All of these is on this album. It's very representative. I would recommend, after listening to this album, check out some of the videos on YouTube. You get a whole nother dimension in what he's doing. Just a fantastic representation of what he was doing at this time. A wonderful live album. And if you like this, you might want to check out another Windham Hill artist, a duet called Tuck and Patty.
Oh yeah, I know Tuck and Patty.
Yeah, wonderful guitar work from Tuck, and Patty's voice is just amazing.
They did a cover of Time After Time.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
I didn't know that.
That's what
Yeah.
I know of. Yeah.
I'm gonna have to check
Yeah.
that out. Yeah.
Yeah.
But there was a lot of Windham Hill. Windham Hill's recordings did end up covering a wide breadth of styles. So yeah, underappreciated, but definitely 80s. I discovered Michael Hedges right about the time I discovered Pat Metheny.
Okay.
During the college years. So yeah, very much into the whole guitar thing. Big recommendation from me.
Okay. Okay. Good to know. So, Ghosh, what is your view of this album?
Okay, so Michael Hedges is a name I have known for some time, but I don't think I've really listened to him before this. Quick glance through the library says that I do happen to have an album called Aerial Boundaries, which I may have heard point, but I have no recollection of it whatsoever. So I was basically plunging into this pretty much empty. And I like what I heard. It's not really my thing, the whole, guitar-based albums. I'm much more of a vocal guy. I like my lyrics and my powerful voices. But unlike Jim, I have no problems with Michael Hedges' voice. I think he has a rather good voice, and I have been subjected on occasion to some pretty awful singing by legendary guitarists. So, in my opinion,
Okay.
well, is he's worth a lot, and I thought he was pretty good. The cover of All Along the Watchtower is quite nice. I mean, it's if Hendrix is the definitive, then this is, I think, at least a definitive acoustic. It's quite well done. And regarding his voice, I mean, I think the second track is called Ready or Not. And after All Along the Watchtower, I was actually expecting maybe a version of Jackson Brown's Ready or Not. And I'm happy to say that the song I heard, which of course is Hedges' own song, he does come across as a bit of Jackson Brown. There is that little bit of Jackson Brown timbre to his voice. And I could imagine that particular song actually being sung by Jackson Brown. It's pleasant. It's I mean, the guitar virtuoso stuff is very good, and the singing is not too bad either. It's quite enjoyable. I liked Ready or Not a lot. The covers, Come Together has now become a sort of standard go-to. I've seen a few of these, more percussive and acoustic virtuoso kind of guitarist attempt Come Together. So and admittedly, it's not even a very favorite Beatles song for me. It feels a little bit like a low-hanging fruit selection, but All Watchtower was good. A Love Bizarre, again, I'm not a big Prince fan, but that version kind of made me stand up and take notice. It was nicely done. And I detected a certain parallel in the way the rhythm and the acoustic playing. But there's a song by Richard Thompson on his Mirror Blue album 1994 called Fast Food. And the way Richard Thompson plays the rhythms on that one, the way Love Bazaar was approached reminded me a lot of Fast Food. I mean, there is some kind of similarity there, I found.
Yeah.
And if you know me, any comparison with Richard Thompson is great.
Okay.
So yeah, I found this album very enjoyable. More so the vocal tracks, I think. The instrumental was fantastic, but it's a little bit easier for me to get, lost or like distracted when listening to too much instrumental, unless it is of the Shakti variety where you just cannot take your ears off it for 1 microsecond.
Yeah.
But no denying the virtuosity. I mean, the guitaring is fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
An album, it is very melodic, very enjoyable. There's not a lot of virtuosity for the sake of it. It's very tight. It's very fitting with the purpose of the piece. There's not too much pyrotechnics for the sake of it. I find that especially live, a lot of guitarists can really go off the handle. But considering that it's a live album, I think it's been quite remarkably restrained and kept it very fitting to the overall piece. Not really gone off on random tangents at all. And that makes it very enjoyable for me. I like this
Good
album.
point.
I'm really going to go back and Michael.
Well said.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And a couple of other points I'd like to make. One of the live albums I had picked for focus later on is Nick Harper's Double Life. And I instantly found a lot of similarity between Michael Hedges' style and what I was used to with Nick Harper. I'm quite a huge fan of Nick Harper. And he has a similar, very percussive, very strongly rhythmic kind of style. Probably not this level of virtuosity, but he has his own tricks and he has a fantastic multi-octave voice and he writes some incredible songs. So that really reminded me of what I'd experienced with Nick Harper. And I think as I dig more into Michael Hedges, I'll probably find a lot more. In fact, I don't know. Nick was directly influenced, but
Okay.
it certainly sounds. And a small point on Windmill, since everybody's chiming in. I don't know much about the label, but I will say that as someone who's deep into a lot of Celtic music,
Mhm.
I as
Yeah.
someone who's seen a lot of Celtic music get sort of you know demeaned for being very background music kind of thing. I don't agree with that at all personally. And one Celtic album I can definitely recommend is this album by a band called Night Noise. It's called the White House Sessions. It's on Windham Hill. Just some superb virtuoso musicians playing in a Celtic style, and they have this version of Van Morrison's Moon Dance, which has to be heard to be believed. It is fantastic.
All
Okay.
right.
I mean, it's
Okay, I'll
off
look
like a
that up.
Celtic air, and then it builds up to the full power. And I dare say, in some ways, it surpasses the original for me. I love that version. That's an album worth checking out.
All right. I will check that out. Hmm. Big surprise. Mm. All right, ladies and gentlemen, there you have it. A extended live album spotlight triple play edition. I want to thank Jim, Ken, and Segosh for joining me on this episode and for giving their insights into Shakti and John McLaughlin, Cowboy Junkies, and Michael Hedges. So please, out there, check out these albums. Um, you can get them definitely on Discogs. I know that for a fact. I've looked them up. And we can also stream them on YouTube. And if you know of these albums, please put down in the comments below your opinion of these albums. And, if we missed anything, is there another point that should have been made on any one of these releases? Okay. And again, we're not music experts in any shape, form, or fashion. We're just bringing you our opinion on these albums. And hopefully, if this is something new, if this is an album that you've never heard of, something new to listen to, or if this is an album that you've heard of or know of but forgotten about, maybe revisit an old friend, right? Just have fun with it. So for everyone here, I'm Armando signing off. Please click like and subscribe, and do hit the notification bell to keep yourselves on top of any new content we've got coming up. And I will plug this again. Jim, Ken, and I are working on a series called Going for the One, where we are going to be talking about our favorite debut albums. 30 albums for the month of September. It's going to be a barn burner. I trust you, it will be. And we're going to bring that to you for the month of September. Filming starts very soon. And again, any other comments you wanna make or before we go? Okay. All right. Again, for Jim, Ken, and Sagosh, I'm Armando signing off. Please look after yourselves and one another, and we'll see you soon on the Music Den. Bye for now.